My mother looked straight through me at my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "She's not seated with us, she's here to help with the kitchen." There was no seat with my name on it. I had driven 4 hours to get there. I was wearing the same dress I'd worn to my college graduation because I thought it might finally be enough. It wasn't. My brother's wife, Camille, leaned across the table and smiled at me the way a person smiles at a stranger who's lost and clearly going to ask for directions. "We only reserved seating for immediate family and close guests," she said. "You understand." My brother said nothing. He adjusted his watch, the one my parents had given him for his 30th birthday, the one they'd announced at another family dinner I'd been half invited to, and went back to his conversation. So I stayed where they put me, near the back hallway, next to the catering setup, holding a glass of water like I'd been assigned to hold it. I let them pretend I was staff. I let them do it because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I hadn't come to that dinner for them. I had come because someone else needed me there, someone they had spent the last 6 months trying to impress, and she was already on her way in. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how we got here. My grandmother turned 80 that September. The dinner was held at a private room inside the kind of restaurant my family liked to use as evidence of their success. A converted historic building in the old part of town, white tablecloths, sommelier on staff. The kind of place where the menu doesn't list prices. My father had organized it. He loved organizing things that made him look generous. What he actually was a man who had spent 30 years turning family events into networking opportunities. I drove up from Nashville, where I had lived for the past 3 years. I hadn't been invited in the traditional sense. My mother had called 2 weeks before and said, in a tone that made it sound like an afterthought, "The dinner's on the 14th. You can come if you want. Don't expect a speech." That was it. No details on timing, no hotel recommendation, no mention of whether there was a seat with my name on it. I looked up the restaurant myself. I booked my own hotel room. I showed up anyway because she was my grandmother, and because I am still, even now, the kind of person who shows up. I arrived 20 minutes early. The hostess checked the reservation list twice before admitting she didn't see my name. She was still apologizing when my mother appeared behind me in a silk blouse and the pearl earrings she only wore to events she considered important. "She's not on the main list," my mother said. She said it calmly, factually, like it was a clarification and not a dismissal. There wasn't room at the table. She knew that. She hadn't told me that. We both knew she hadn't told me that. But she turned and walked back into the private room before I could respond, and the hostess gave me a look of pure helpless sympathy. And that was that. My brother came out a few minutes later. He looked almost uncomfortable, which was more than I usually got from him. "Just stay out of the way," he said. "Mum's got the seating worked out and she doesn't want it messed with. You can eat after." Eat after? Like I was the dog. Camille passed by in a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent and told me, without stopping, that the caterers were setting up in the back and I might be more comfortable there. She didn't even look at me when she said it. I found a spot near the back wall, half behind a floor arrangement that someone had placed too close to the entryway. From there I could see the whole room, my father holding court at the center table, laughing with his business partner and the 2 city council members he'd invited. My brother and Camille positioned near the head of the table, beside my grandmother, who hadn't seen me yet and was looking around the room in a way that suggested she was wondering where I was. My mother moving between conversations with the practiced ease of someone who had spent decades managing the impression other people had of her family. Managing the impression meant one thing in practice, keeping me out of the frame. I was not the daughter they talked about at events. My brother had gone to law school, passed the bar on the first try, made partner at 33. Camille had a graduate degree in art history and sat on the board of a local museum. My parents had given them a down payment on their house. When I dropped out of culinary school at 22 to work in restaurant kitchens, my father told me I was throwing my life away. When I moved to Nashville 3 years ago to open my own place, my mother told her friends I was still figuring things out. They had never visited the restaurant. They had never asked about it. As far as my family's social story was concerned, I did not have a restaurant. I had a phase. I took a glass of water from a passing tray and thanked the server, who gave me a nod of quiet solidarity that I appreciated more than I could explain. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I had saved under a single initial, W. "Parking now. 5 minutes. You ready?" I typed back, "Yes." 3 years ago, I had taken everything I had, savings from 5 years of line cooking, a small business loan, and a lease on a failing sandwich shop in East Nashville, and turned it into Saltline, a 40-seat restaurant that served the kind of food I'd grown up missing, coastal southern cooking, the kind that came from my grandmother's side of the family, the side my parents never talked about because they considered it humble. Saltline had been written up in the Tennessean in its first year. The second year, a food critic from Atlanta had called it one of the most quietly confident new restaurants in the South. The third year, a woman named Wren Calloway had walked in on a Tuesday night without a reservation. Wren Calloway was the founder of Calloway Hospitality Group, which owned 17 restaurants across 7 states. She had built her first concept at 26 with no family money and no industry connections, and she had spent the last decade being one of the most respected and least celebrityized figures in American food. She was not famous in the way chefs on television were famous. She was famous in the way that mattered, the kind of famous where the most powerful people in your industry called her before they made decisions. She'd come back to Saltline 4 times before she asked to meet with me. My father had emailed her office twice in the past year, pitching his services as a commercial real estate broker. She had not responded. My mother had tried to get an introduction through a mutual acquaintance at a charity luncheon. It had not gone anywhere. Neither of them knew that Wren had been sitting across from me at my own restaurant for the past 2 months, talking about what a partnership might look like. The shift in the room happened before she even appeared in the doorway. It was a sound first, not a sound exactly, but the absence of one. The particular hush that spreads through a room when someone whose name people know has just walked in. I watched my father turn from his conversation. I watched my brother straighten in his chair. I watched Camille, who had excellent social radar, look toward the entrance with an expression that was trying to look casual and not managing it. Wren Calloway walked past the main table without glancing at it. She walked past my father. She walked past my brother. She walked past the city council members who had probably hoped to catch her attention. She walked to the back of the room, to the spot near the floral arrangement, and she shook my hand and said, clearly enough for the people closest to us to hear, "I've been looking for you. We need to talk about moving forward." The room did not freeze exactly, but it slowed. Conversations dropped half a register. Heads turned. My mother's smile stayed on her face but stopped reaching her eyes. My father set down his glass. My brother looked at me the way people look at a street they thought they knew when they realized they'd been reading the map wrong. I nodded at Wren. "I know a quieter spot," I said. I walked out of the back hallway and into the small parlor the restaurant used for private conversations, and I did not look at my family as I passed their table. Behind me, I heard my mother's heels on the hardwood. She caught up to us just outside the parlor door. "Miss Calloway." Her voice was warm positioned, the voice she used when she wanted something. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm her mother. We're so glad you could join the celebration tonight." Wren stopped and looked at her with a polite, distant expression of someone who has been approached by a lot of people who want something and has learned to recognize them instantly. "I'm not here for the celebration," she said. "I'm here for a meeting." "Of course." My mother's smile adjusted. "I'm sure whatever you're discussing, it would benefit from some family context. We've always been very supportive of her work, and I'd love to." "She's never mentioned that," Wren said. "It wasn't cruel, it was just accurate." She turned to me. "Shall we?" We went into the parlor. My father appeared a moment later, with my brother behind him. My father had the expression of a man who was used to being the most important person in a room, and had just discovered, at his own mother's birthday dinner, that he was not. "I want to make sure there's no confusion here," he said. He was using his business voice, measured, confident, the voice that worked on people who didn't know him. Whatever she's told you about her restaurant, I'd encourage you to involve proper legal counsel before any agreements are signed. She's talented, but she doesn't always have the full picture on the financial side. Ren looked at him for a moment. She negotiated a partnership structure that protects her majority ownership stake, maintains her creative control across all future concepts, and includes a buyout provision that any attorney I know would call generous to the operator. She paused. I'd say she has a fairly complete picture. My brother opened his mouth and closed it again. Camille, who had appeared in the doorway, said smoothly, "I'm sure this is all very exciting, but this is a family dinner, and I think we can all agree that business conversations are better suited to." "The business conversation was scheduled," I said. I kept my voice even. "The family dinner is what wasn't." The silence that followed lasted long enough that it became its own statement. I turned back to Ren. "I'm sorry about this." "Don't apologize," she said. She said it quietly enough that only I could hear it. "Let's get to work." We spent 40 minutes in that parlor with Ren's attorney, who had been waiting at a corner table in the main dining room with a briefcase and a glass of sparkling water, and who was the only person in the building who looked like none of this surprised him. The terms we finalized that evening would expand Saltline into 3 new markets over the next 2 years, with full creative control retained by me and a capital investment that I will not state here because it is none of their business and because the number would not have made sense to them yet. It would only make sense later when they started doing the math. When Ren and I came back out to the main dining room, my family was still there. The birthday dinner had gone quiet. My grandmother, who had finally spotted me, caught my eye across the room and gave me the small nod she'd been giving me since I was a child. The one that meant I see you, I always have. My mother approached first. "Eleanor, we need to talk." "No," I said, "we don't." "You can't just." "The way you told me there wasn't room at the table." I kept my voice low. Every word landed clean. "The way you told me to eat after, like I was here to help set up." Her face went red. "We were trying to manage the seating. It was complicated." "It's been complicated my whole life," I said. "I'm not confused about what this is." Camille stepped forward with the expression she wore when she was about to say something she'd packaged as reasonable. "You're clearly under a lot of stress. Major business decisions do that. Why don't you take some time and we can all sit down together once things have settled?" "The papers are already signed," I said. Camille's expression did not change, but something behind it went very still. My brother was looking at me the way he used to look at me when we were children, and I had done something he couldn't figure out how to respond to. There had been a time, before law school, before Camille, before all of it, when he and I had been close. I remembered it occasionally the way you remember a place you lived as a child, fondly and with the knowledge that it no longer exists. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "I didn't know any of it." "I know you didn't," I said. "You didn't ask." My father was standing at the edge of the conversation, looking like a man who had miscalculated something significant and was still working out exactly where the error had occurred. "Whatever arrangement you've made," he started, "you should know that the family has connections in the hospitality industry that could be valuable to you. I've done commercial real estate for 30 years. I know every major development group in." "You emailed her office twice," I said. "She didn't respond." He stopped. "I'm going to say goodbye to Grandma," I said, "and then I'm going to drive back tonight." I crossed the room to where my grandmother was sitting, still at the head of the table, watching everything with the particular calm of someone who has seen 80 years of people behaving exactly like themselves. I bent down and hugged her, and she held on for a moment longer than the hug required. "I heard about your restaurant," she said. "Frances Mitchell went to Nashville for her granddaughter's bachelorette and they ate there. She called me the next day just to talk about the shrimp." I laughed unexpectedly. "The shrimp," I said. "She said it tasted like being somewhere real." My grandmother patted my hand. "I'd like to come see it." "I'll set a table for you," I said. "Best one in the house." She nodded and her eyes were bright, and that was worth 4 hours of driving and a dress I'd worn too many times. I walked out of the restaurant alone. Ren was waiting outside for her car, checking her phone. She looked up when I came out. For what it's worth, she said, I've been in this industry for 20 years. The operators who make it, not just survive, actually make it, they almost always have something to prove. Not to the world, to specific people. She looked at me steadily. I always like to know which people those are before I sign anything. And now you know, I said. Now I know. Her car pulled up. Get some rest. Monday morning, 9 o'clock, my team is going to have questions. She got in. I stood on the sidewalk for a minute after her taillights disappeared. My phone buzzed. My mother, call me when you get home. We need to discuss what happened tonight. I put the phone in my pocket and started walking toward my car. The drive back to Nashville took 4 hours. I stopped once for coffee at a truck stop outside of Cookeville and sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes listening to the radio because I wasn't ready to be alone with my thoughts yet. I thought about my grandmother's face. I thought about Wren's car pulling away. I thought about my brother saying I didn't know with the particular tone of someone who was beginning to understand the difference between not knowing and not asking. The morning after the dinner I woke up to 23 missed calls. 16 from my mother, 5 from my father, 2 from my brother. Camille had not called. I noted that. I did not call back. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started reading the term sheet one more time. Not because I needed to check it, but because sometimes you need to hold evidence of a thing in your hands before your body believes it's real. My brother came to Nashville 3 days later. He texted first, which surprised me. Can I come down? Not to fix anything, just to talk. I told him he could come to the restaurant before we opened, when it was still quiet and smelled like cleaning solution and coffee grounds and whatever we were testing for the fall menu. He sat at the bar and looked around the room for a long time without saying anything. It's beautiful, he said finally. Thank you. I've never been here. I know. He turned his glass in his hands. I keep trying to figure out when I stopped asking about your life, about what you were building. He paused. I think it was when Camille and I got engaged and suddenly everything was about the wedding and then the house and then her career and then my partnership track and you fell out of the picture somewhere in there and I told myself you were fine and I never actually checked. I wasn't fine for a while, I said. I'm fine now. I know, that's what makes it worse. He set down the glass. I'm sorry, not because of the Callaway deal, not because of how it looked at dinner. I'm sorry because you're my sister and I should have shown up a long time ago and I didn't. I looked at him across the bar. He looked like himself, which was a relief. Not the version of himself that appeared at family events, all polish and practice confidence. Just my brother, tired and honest and somewhat lost. I'm not ready to make any promises about what this looks like going forward, I said, but I'm not interested in holding on to this either. I've got too much to do. He nodded. Fair. Come back when we're open, I said. I'll feed you. He laughed a little. It was a real laugh, the kind we used to exchange when we were kids, and it felt strange and familiar at the same time, the way childhood things do. The news of the partnership had gotten out by the time I was back in Nashville. The Tennessean ran a brief item. Food industry newsletters picked it up. My phone was full of messages from people I'd worked with over the years. Line cooks, sous chefs, a woman I'd staged with in Charleston for 3 months, who sent me a voice note that was mostly just screaming. I read all of them and answered most of them, and felt, underneath the noise, a steady quiet that I didn't have a name for yet. My parents did not reach out for 11 days. When my father finally called, he got my voicemail. He left a message that lasted 4 minutes and covered, in order, congratulations on the partnership, a suggestion that I consider hiring his firm for any Nashville commercial real estate needs as we expanded, a reminder that family connections were valuable in business, and a closing statement that he and my mother had always believed in me and were proud of everything I had accomplished. He did not mention the birthday dinner. He did not mention the seat that wasn't there. He did not mention telling me to eat after. I listened to the message once, in my car outside the restaurant before the lunch shift. Then I set my phone on the passenger seat and sat there for a moment. He had said we always believed in you. I thought about my mother's voice in the restaurant foyer. She's not on the main list. And the way she had turned and walked away before I could respond. I thought about the way my brother had shrugged and adjusted his watch. I thought about Camille's smile, aimed at me like a small, precise tool. I thought about my grandmother's hands, holding on a beat longer than necessary. I deleted the message without responding. My mother tried 3 more times over the following weeks. 2 texts, 1 email. The email was long and used the word family 11 times in 12 paragraphs and did not include a single apology. It included, instead, a suggestion that I reach out to Camille, who apparently had some thoughts on the branding direction of the partnership that might be useful. Camille, who had asked me to step away from my own family photo. Camille, who had told me the caterers were in the back. I read the email, closed it, and went back to the tasting menu I was writing for our soft opening in Atlanta. The thing about building something is that it takes all of you for years, and during those years you get very good at identifying what is worth your energy and what isn't. My family had never understood that I was building anything. They had looked at me and seen someone who hadn't found her way yet. Someone to be managed and minimized and kept out of the frame. What I'd actually been doing was learning every station in every kitchen that would take me, saving every dollar, studying every lease, and building, slowly and without announcement, something that was entirely mine. They had assumed failure because it was easier than asking. I had let them assume it because I had learned by then that some people can't be convinced with words. They can only be shown. 6 months after the birthday dinner, my grandmother came to Nashville. My brother drove her. Just the 2 of them, no parents. I had reserved the corner table by the window, the one that looks out on the courtyard where we grow herbs in summer. I had been cooking since 6 that morning. She sat down and looked around the room with the same careful attention she'd always given things, the way she used to look at a quilt pattern or at a garden she was about to plant, assessing and appreciating at the same time. "Your grandfather would have liked this place," she said. "I know," I said. "I thought about him when I picked the name." She looked at me. "Salt line." "His word for the coast," I said, "the way he always described going back home." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "He would have been proud. I want you to know that." We ate for 2 hours. My brother ate more than I'd seen him eat in years and kept asking questions about the menu in a way that suggested he was genuinely curious, which was new, and I answered them, and we talked about food and about Nashville and about things that had nothing to do with our parents. And it was the closest we had come to being siblings in a very long time. When they left, my grandmother hugged me at the door and held on again the way she had at the birthday dinner. "Don't wait too long to forgive them," she said, "not as a demand. Just as an offering, from someone who'd been watching this family longer than any of us." "I'm working on it," I said. She nodded, and she and my brother walked to the car, and I stood in the doorway and watched them drive away, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not peace exactly, but the beginning of it. The kind that comes not from being proven right, but from finally being seen by someone who mattered. I had not set out to build a life that would embarrass my parents. I had set out to build something I believed in the only way I knew how. Alone, quietly, one shift at a time. The fact that it had grown into something they now wanted to attach their name to was not my doing. It was just the result of what happens when you stop waiting for permission. They had told me there was no seat at the table. I went and built my own. The thing I keep coming back to, years later, is not the moment Ren walked past my parents. It's the moment before it. Me standing alone near the back wall of that restaurant, holding a glass of water I hadn't asked for. Wearing a dress I'd worn too many times, trying to decide whether I was ashamed or just tired. I wasn't ashamed. That's what I finally understood that night. I had confused the two for years. What happened at that dinner wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck or a misunderstanding or a complicated family dynamic that nobody could have predicted. It was cause and effect, playing out exactly the way it always does, just slower than we expect. My parents had spent years choosing image over honesty, choosing the child who fit their story over the one who didn't, choosing the appearance of a successful family over the actual work of being one. That kind of choosing has a cost. They just didn't expect to pay it in public. And I had spent years making my own choices, not dramatic ones. Small, daily ones, showing up to every shift, learning every station, saving when I could have spent, signing a lease on a failing sandwich shop when every reasonable person in my life would have told me not to. None of those choices felt powerful when I was making them. They felt like stubbornness. They felt like the only thing I knew how to do. But that's what I've come to understand about building something real. It doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Every decision you make from a place of genuine conviction, rather than from fear of what other people will think, adds up to something that can't be taken away. My parents could remove my name from a guest list. They could not remove 3 years of work from a kitchen in Nashville. My grandmother knew something about this. She had watched this family for 80 years, and when she held on a beat longer than necessary at the door of my restaurant, I think she was passing something forward. The kind of knowledge that doesn't translate into advice, only into presence. She had done hard things quietly for decades and never asked for a banquet in her honor. She just kept showing up for the people she loved, including me, even when showing up meant sitting at the head of a table and watching her family behave like strangers to each other. What I want to say to anyone who recognizes this story, who has stood near the back wall, been left off the list, been told in 100 small ways that they don't belong in the room they were born into, is this: the sharpest thing you can do is not revenge, it's clarity. Knowing what you're actually building and why. Knowing the difference between people who doubt you because they're afraid for you and people who diminish you because your existence inconveniences them. That distinction took me years to make cleanly, and making it changed everything. I didn't need my family to believe in me. I needed to believe in myself with enough consistency that the work became undeniable. Not to prove them wrong, that's a small goal and it runs out of fuel, but because the work itself was worth doing. Because those 40 seats in East Nashville were full of people who had driven across town for a meal that tasted, as Frances Mitchell told my grandmother, like somewhere real. That's what I was building. Not a comeback, a life. My brother sat at my bar and said I didn't know, and I believed him. Ignorance and cruelty are different things, and knowing the difference matters when you're deciding what to do next. I'm not interested in holding grudges. I'm interested in my grandmother coming back in the spring, sitting at the corner table and ordering the shrimp again. I'm interested in my brother asking real questions and getting real answers. I'm interested in what we might still become to each other if we're both willing to do it honestly. The rest of it, the missed calls, the 4-minute voicemail, the email that used the word family 11 times without once saying sorry, that's not mine to carry anymore. They told me there was no seat at the table. I went and built my own, and I left a chair open just in case someone eventually earns it.